We're really looking forward to our land lecture today, which is going to be hearing all about Sue Ferns in the form of a chat with Theresa Chambers. When we get going, I'll do some housekeeping, and then I'll hand over to Gilbert Owusu, who's the president of the OR Society, to do a few more introductions. And what I've just been saying is, when you arrive, if you're happy to, just put who you are, whether you're an academic at a university or a practitioner in a particular department or industry, and where you are in the world. Okay. So I will kick us off, I think. So, and thanks everyone for making the time. Really looking forward to this discussion. So, as I mentioned, I'll do a very brief housekeeping section at the beginning, and then hand over to Gilbert. Then we move into the main part of the land lecture today, which is where Theresa and Sue will be talking, and there'll be opportunities for people to ask questions. And those questions can either be put in the chat, and you can be invited to ask that question, or we can ask the question on your behalf, or you can just put up your hand when we get to the Q&A section. Then we're going to have, after the session, we want to have a bit more of keeping the conversation going. So we'll do some breakup discussion groups, so we can have a chat about some of the things that were some of the takeaways. Then we'll return just for me to do some forward look of what else is coming up for WARAN in the next couple of months. And then I'll let you get away. So it'd be great to have some of you on camera, so we can see you all while Sue and Theresa are talking. But microphones off, so it doesn't interrupt. We are recording this session today, and it'll be available on our YouTube channel. We've told people to adjust their names, but I know sometimes Zoom can be a bit funny about that. So as I said, you can always put your name in the chat as well. As we've already covered questions, we'll do it. We're thinking about splitting it into roughly 3 parts. So we'll hear about Sue's current job and early motivational experience, then the trade union role, and particularly focusing on the women and what's the workplace. And then we've got her advice for us in a section we're calling What Now, What Next? And then, as I said, we'll move on to the breakout rooms. So at this point, I'd like to welcome Gilbert Owusu, who's the president of the OR Society, who's going to introduce the session by telling us a little bit about the WARAN network, and also about the founding of the land lecture. So I'll hand over to Gilbert.
Thank you very much, Catherine, and thank you for joining us today. And a warm welcome to those of you who are members of the OR Society, or the Women in OR and Analytics Networks. And also to the many guests who are not members but are interested in the themes of today's event. The OR Society established WARAN in 2019. This was partly in response to some research which highlighted the importance of networks in supporting women, mainly to break down some of the barriers in participation. Since then, WARAN have held a number of events. It's roughly monthly since lockdown in 2020, and with an annual flagship event as the highlight of the year. This annual event is scheduled to take place as close as possible to Ada Lovelace Day every year, the day for celebrating women in STEM. The annual flagship event has been renamed the Land Lecture after Professor Elsa Land. And I will like to say a few words about Professor Land. Ailsa was a pioneer of OR in the UK. She was the first female professor of OR in Britain, a role model and a mentor to many. In 1960, Ailsa and her colleague, Alison Harcourt, developed the branch and bound method, which has transformed the field of mathematical programming. I believe OR people in the audience will recognize branch and bound as one of the fundamental optimization techniques still in use today. Ailsa also pioneered the use of computational tools to turn clever maths into practical application. For her PhD, she used linear programming to analyze how best to transport coal from 154 British pits to 65 coke ovens, where it would be converted into coke for the steelmaking industry. This is at the heart of OR. I mean, developing impactful applications which are underpinned by brilliant research. She was the first one to win the OR Society most prestigious award, the Beale Medal, in 2019, sadly only after, this was after a short time before her death. I'd like to say a bit about what Warren events are for. They are aimed to make women visible as role models and contributors to OR, to explore issues affecting women, to help build and consolidate professional interaction and network, to make sure that women's voices are heard, and to be an enjoyable opportunity to get out and about. I mean, we are not doing that today. We are meeting virtually. Of course, let's make the most of our time together. The Warren events are open to everyone, no matter what sex or gender. And the Warren Land lecture has a specific remit. What happens is that we get an eminent female guest speaker. I would like to take this opportunity to express my thanks to Catherine, Ruth, and the entire team for consistently securing exceptional speakers for the Land lecture. The topics are carefully chosen. The aim is for the speakers to talk on a topic that has particular resonance for women and for anybody who is concerned about female representation in OR and analytics. The Warren Land lecture is to inspire, inform, support by making women visible as role models and contributors to science, exploring issues affecting women and ensuring that women's voices are heard. Now shifting our focus to today's presenters, I am delighted to welcome our special guest, Sue Ferns. Sue has spent her career working for the trades unions movement. She was the president of the Trades Union Congress in 2021 to 2022, and is still chair of the TUC's Women's Committee and the Trade Union Sustainability Development Advisory Committee. She does this alongside her day job as Senior General Secretary of Prospect, the Union for STEM Workers in Business, Industry, and the Public Sector. For those of you who came to last year's lecture, the format will be familiar. Sue will explore some of the big themes arising from her career. Catherine has given us a feel for what is to come, and also activities. And this will be done in conversation with Theresa Chambers, a member of the OR community. Theresa is particularly fitted to talk to Sue as she's a long-standing Prospect member. She's currently joint head of energy infrastructure and markets analysis at the Department for Energy Security and Net Zero. At this point, I'd like to say a big warm welcome to both of you. And now, Theresa, the floor is yours.
Thank you so much, Gilbert. Can you hear me okay? Fabulous,
yes,
that's working.
Yes.
Brilliant. I can't describe how excited I am, Sue, to be to have the honour So I don't want to build you up too much, but to have the honour of talking to you. I've been a lifelong trade union member. I believe deeply in women's equality and equity. The things you stand for are things I stand for, and like you, I was the first woman in my family to get a degree and to go into these kind of paths. I think you've got a huge amount to share with us, and I'm really excited about this. So shall we kick off with your current job, which is a huge one. Is there such a thing as a normal day in your job?
Let me just first of all say thank you very much to everybody for inviting me. I'm not sure whether I qualify as an eminent person, but I feel like I'm in a virtual room full of eminent people. I just happen to be working in a different sphere to all of you. There aren't 2 days the same in my job, which is one of the things that I really like about it, actually. So I have, for example, just come back from the Labour Party conference on Sunday and yesterday, where I've been talking about climate and energy policy with a great interest, actually, from delegates. I was at a TUC Women's Committee this afternoon. Tomorrow I've got a range of internal meetings, and then later on in the week I'll be interviewing. So it's a combination of office-based and travelling, working with really interesting members, and actually it's a great privilege to do this job. I'm so proud of Prospect members because you're all brilliant and you're all so full of knowledge and great experience. So I can be doing that in the energy sector, which I'm responsible for, building new membership in renewables, for example, which is a priority for us at the moment. Or I could be working in heritage. We've just done a series of Heritage in the North roadshows where we've been to some of the great institutions in the North, talking to members there. Or I could be visiting a dockyard in the defence sector, which is all great. It's such a privilege to see all those people in their work environments. I also have responsibility. I manage some teams in London and in the regions, and I lead the work on environment and sustainability and on women's equality. Who could want for more? It's busy, but it's really enjoyable.
It sounds fascinating. Having recently moved into energy myself, well, it's 5 years now, but still recently for me, given some people stay in this sector forever. What do you see as the main differences between the sectors that you cover, and what are the similarities?
So the main differences, the population of people working in the different sectors can be quite different. Energy, maybe not in your role, Theresa, but out there in the power stations and the networks is still quite heavily male dominated, as is defence. And there's an ageing profile of membership in those areas, although we are getting more and more young people come through. In heritage, we've got a much younger cohort of people, all very, very highly qualified, but dreadfully low paid. And I do often think that if you visit London and you go to the British Museum or the National Gallery, most tourists would not have a clue about the level of expertise of our members, but they're shockingly low pay. So there are very different settings, some different cultures, but actually what's the unifying force? It's about people, I think, who have a positive motivation to have a voice in their workplace. And that's really important, I think. We talk a lot about good work, which isn't just about pay levels, it's about your opportunity to have some voice on the day-to-day decisions that affect your working life. And I don't think it matters what sector you work in there. And also, there's some very significant contributions that our volunteer representatives make in helping people with, if they've got a problem at work, and working to negotiate pay or changes in terms and conditions. So I think the reps are all great, the members are all great. The sectors are very different, I mean, we do represent much more widely than that. For example, we represent the professional football referees, we represent air traffic controllers, and people working on soaps like Coronation Street and Emmerdale. And how many people get an opportunity in their working life to see behind the scenes in that range of environments?
That's fantastic. I bet you get some good days out. I love to visit a renewables farm or a gas plant.
Yeah, I do. Not every week or every month. I do get some good days out. But you know what? They're not just days out. They're real opportunities to learn. Because, you know, you can write policy sitting in an office, you can write a pay claim, but where you really learn is going out to workplaces, going to power stations and talking to people and just seeing the environments that they work in. It's such a learning experience. And, you know, life for me is about learning. So that's great.
Fantastic. Now, I have some personal experience of the impact that unionship can bring. My ex-partner belonged to a non-unionised organisation. Prospect were then invited in to become the union for his sector. They weren't allowed part-time before Prospect helped them to have a voice, and he was able to go part-time and help raise our children. So thank you to Prospect on behalf of me personally. On that question of impact, so last year you were the president of the TUC. What are you most proud of? What do you think the impact felt is?
So what am I most proud of? First of all, that I had the opportunity to do that. I never in my wildest dreams imagined that I would. And as we may go on to talk about, when I first left university, I did actually work for the TUC. And I think I'm probably the first person who's worked for the TUC in the past who's gone on to do that role. So it was a great honour for me. But I think also a great honour for the union as well. And I guess a lot of people don't know very much about Prospect. We're not one of the unions that's in the news all the time, although we would be if we had an air traffic control strike or turned off the lights. But people will have heard about Unite, they'll have heard about the RMT, probably about Unison as well, us do all the shop workers union. So it was a real opportunity to put Prospect in the spotlight. And that means putting our members in the spotlight as well. So that was great. It gave me an opportunity to talk to people from other unions who I would never have met otherwise, to understand more about their opportunities and challenges. I had the opportunity to go for a little while to the COP22, just briefly in my role as president, which was great. And then chairing the Congress itself, it's a big chairing job, 4 days of it. Makes you very nervous before you get started, but I did it. So, you know, that's good.
I'm not sure how open you can be here and being recorded, but what was the most hassle you had to deal with? Were there any troublemakers you had to sort?
At the Congress,
Yeah.
actually they were all pretty well behaved, but if you think about, one of the things that did concern me a little bit was, think about some of the union general secretaries, thinking probably about men on the whole. Many people in the trade union movement are not known for being short of words, and there is a time limit to contributions. So I did worry that I wouldn't be able to control everybody's contribution. So what I did was I decided I'm going to do this from the beginning. I'm going to set the standard from the beginning. And everybody was pretty decent about that, actually.
Successful?
Well, maybe I'm not the person to ask. From my point of view, it was okay, yes.
I'm going to ask one last question, but I'm just going to let people in the audience know that we are happy to take questions. You can put questions in the chat. You can put your hand up at any time if you have a burning question. Please do. This is all about kind of all of us hearing what Sue has to say. So if you have a question, please do come in. But the last one I have on your kind of current role is now you're back full time as the, I'm going to try and get this right, Senior Deputy General Secretary of Prospect. What's your goals for this year in that role?
So it doesn't exactly trip off the tongue, does it? So I was never away from full time. I was doing the TUC role as well as my job. So my goals for this year are to build our membership in the areas that I'm responsible for, to, in the heritage sector, try and make some progress on pay and funding for those institutions. In energy, to expand our reach into lots of the areas that aren't currently unionised, for example, in renewables, in solar and so on. And to a key objective over the next year, given that we're going to have a general election within that period, is to ensure that of what our priorities are, but not just telling them about our priorities, working to try and provide solutions or pathways to make real progress for them. Because I think that's what politicians look for. Everybody tells them about what the problems are. I think the challenge on us is greater than that. It's to articulate the problem, but also to suggest a solution. So that will be a big priority for me over the coming year.
Sounds like a very full year ahead, but a very remarkably impactful one. Are there any questions from our audience before we move on to where you came from? No, but let's move on. So I've written down your degrees in organisational analysis and industrial relations. What led you to want to do that as a degree? And did you foresee a career in trade union, in the trade union movement, or did you have other ambitions?
So as an 18-year-old, I didn't know there was such a thing as that degree. But what I knew was that I was really interested in the world of work and the diversity and richness of the world of work. So that was one thing. Second thing was, at the time when I was making those choices, a bit like the last year or so that we've been in, unions were very much in the public eye. So I was interested in unions and the way that they exercise their influence. I could have gone off and done a degree in history, which I also love, but I decided on this one at Salford University. Did I know I was going to end it with a trade union career? No, I didn't. I could have ended up in HR. A lot of people who did the same degree as me ended up in HR. I actually didn't think it would be possible to go straight from university into a trade union career. And I did apply for one union. I didn't get the job. And actually somebody saw the advert for the TUC role and talked me into it because they said there was nothing for me to lose. So I applied and I got the job. Not quite the same as working in a trade union, but absolutely fabulous experience working at that level of the trade union movement and learning so much from that.
And so you've stayed in the trade union movement for your whole career. Have you ever thought about jumping ship?
So I worked for the TUC for 10 years and then I left the TUC, and that was at a point where I had very young children and I felt a bit of a crossroads, really. So partly that, and then partly, great as the experience working at the TUC was, and coming back to my kind of curiosity about the world of work, I thought I wanted to work more closely with trade union members rather than the people who lead the trade unions. So more at a policy or strategy level, but actually having the opportunity to meet and work with trade union members. And I decided that's what I wanted to do. I did have thoughts at the time, maybe I should take a different direction. But, you know, once you're in it, and the pull is so strong, trade union movement really aligns with my values. I always want to make a difference to people at work. I don't do that every day, and I could do it in other roles. But I really like doing it from a trade union perspective, and the sense of shared values, collectivism really appeals to me.
I recognise a lot in that, in terms of me being in government for my whole career. I hadn't intended it when I started out, and it's just been one fascinating and important role after another, and I couldn't imagine doing something more important or interesting at this stage. So I feel very lucky for the opportunities I've had. How was it working with small children in the trade union movement?
Well, I think it was at that time pretty much like a lot of women working with small children. So there wasn't paternity leave at the time. Flexible working wasn't really talked about. So it was a juggling, and to give credit to my partner, he played his role in that as well. But I don't think that was unique to the trade union movement. I think that's a common experience of women working with young children. And although some things have improved, and particularly post-pandemic, we got used to working in different ways, which probably make it a little bit easier. I don't know. It was hard. I did manage to flex my hours slightly to start an hour earlier and finish an hour earlier. But I always had that, got to get back to the childminder, got to get back to the childminder. So if your transport home goes wrong, I mean, loads of you will recognise those pressures. But they're not unique to me, and they're not unique to the trade union movement. And actually, in relation to the time, my employer was pretty decent.
Sorry, I'm scrolling up on the screen here to see if there's anyone with their hand up. I don't think there is. Just going to give one opportunity. If anyone would like to come in with questions, you're more than welcome to. Ruth?
Thanks. I recognise the picture, Sue, of juggling and that lack of flexibility. It's changed, of course, with the growth in flexible hours. Do you feel that it changed because the unions pushed for change, or because women pushed for change, or because a few men realised they also wanted flexible working? It'd be good for everybody, so everyone pushed for change? Or can you look back and say what it was that led to the much more flexible position that we have now?
So I think it was probably women working through their trade unions that had perhaps the major impact. That's not to say that men didn't or don't want to work more flexibly, but I think until very recently, when it's improved a bit, that wasn't an option for many men because of the financial consequences of doing that. And actually, if we are going to get to an equal sharing of responsibility, we need to ensure that that financial penalty is removed for men as well as women. So I think it was women. I think it was women working through their trade unions, because there's your locus in work, there's your opportunity to influence things. But I would say that the progress was incremental. We haven't gone from where we were 30 years ago to where we are now, just like that. It's been an incremental, fairly slow change. And we all know that there's still more to be done. But I think it's better than it was.
I can definitely see and feel a change in my 30 years. Well, in government, I don't have experience outside of government, so I'm really interested because you can see across a whole range of different careers and workplaces. Do you feel like there has been any more or less change in the scientific and analytical communities that a lot of people here are in?
So I think the scientific world of work has improved, for sure, although I think that's been slow and there's still a lot more to do there. Sorry, can you just repeat that question, Theresa?
Just reflecting on particularly the scientific and analytical communities. Do you see many differences in the progress made within these communities than other communities? Are we doing really, really well? Or actually are there things that we could and should be learning from the progress made elsewhere?
So I think one of the key factors here is the focus on skilled, and you're all skilled people. And particularly now that almost every employer I talk to is worried about getting the supply of skills, the appropriate skills that they need, which does create an opportunity to get a something for something deal for a lot of people. And I think we are quite lucky in Prospect in the members we represent who have that knowledge, that leverage often in the labour market because of your skills and expertise. I think one of the problems in STEM is still, for many people, not everybody, a relative lack of flexibility, which of course means perhaps not in government, but out in the private sector, that loss of female scientists and technical staff as they get to that point in their lives where they need more flexible working. I think there are genuine challenges for women in operational roles. Talking recently actually to colleagues who work in film and TV. Now that's an unrelenting schedule of work. It's often very long hours and it's dictated by the need to obviously produce the product, get the film shot, get the TV shot. So that's, I think, a really challenging environment for people. Some of those are actually, they're not STEM based, but they're very technically based. So I think it depends on your work context. I think it depends on the demand for your skills. I think it depends on the culture of your industry or your employer. I don't think there's a one size fits all approach or solution, actually.
It's actually really interesting to hear about the differences in different professions, actually. So I've been in analysis my whole life. So it's really interesting to hear about. This isn't something we talked about previously, but I'm of an age where actually it's really interesting to me, and I'm suffering from menopause symptoms. That feels to me to be a really kind of something which has actually entered into debate in a way that's been really helpful for me. So people are now talking about it in a way that means that I can say in a meeting, I'm so sorry right now, I'm very bad with remembering people's names. I didn't used to be, but I am now. Can you repeat for me? Is that something that you feel the trade union movement has been behind, or something where you recognise a change, or is that something that is mostly in my world, in the civil service?
No, I don't think it is in your world. You know, years ago, you never heard the word, did you? And now you hear men talking about menopause without getting embarrassed about it as well. So I think that's a real step forward. And I genuinely think that is due to the work of trade unions. There's been an awful lot of work gone on to influence policies in organisations, to get people to understand what this means for women. I think there's actually a new BSI regulation about menopause in the workplace. There's ACAS guidance about menopause in the workplace. And I think for women in trade unions, an opportunity to talk to each other as well. From some of our networks, not our overarching network, women's network yet, there have been a lot of conversations about menopause, how women have been affected by that. Also, period dignity has been another topic of conversation that's opened up. That wouldn't have happened without women in trade unions. But it's really good that it has, because nobody ever used to talk about it.
Yeah, and it's a huge step forward from my perspective. I can see Stephen on the call, actually, some of the NHS guidance on practically how you in the workplace, how you deal with menopause and how you support people with menopause is fantastic. It's all on the web. If you are interested, you can go find that. I'm sure you have other sources too. So I'm thinking about the people on this call. We've got about 30 people on the call. Some will be union members and some will never have thought of joining. What would you say are the main benefits and barriers for women for joining the trade union movement?
So I genuinely think the main barrier for women joining, particularly women who work in the private sector, is if they work for an employer where there isn't a union present. And that's more likely in the private sector than the public sector. So for those women, there's nobody in their workplace to talk to about joining a trade union. Some women do it, some people do it as singletons. But I think it's a lot easier if you've got somebody else there to talk to about it, somebody who might encourage you, somebody who might explain what union membership is all about. So I think that's probably the most significant barrier, actually. Another factor that may put people off is, so the people who are trade union members in the workplace who act as representatives are really the face of the union in the workplace. I'm not. I might go to a workplace every now and again, but who people identify with is their local representative first and foremost. So does that person look like you? Is that person approachable? Do they say things at work that make you think, I want to be part of that? I think often they do, but occasionally, as in any volunteer community, people might have views about who their local representative is. I don't think that tends to put women off, because women are the majority of trade union members in the country, which people often don't know, but it might put you off if you're a person of colour, particularly if you work in certain sectors. So there are some cultural things there. I think the opportunities, so we have a lot of members because we work in safety critical industries, in energy, in defence, in air traffic control. Still a lot of people who join the union as an insurance, because if you potentially can kill somebody at work, you want to know you've got somebody who's got your back. And that's a perfectly valid reason for joining a trade union. In the world of entertainment, a lot of our members might join because they get public liability insurance discounted as part of their membership. Again, perfectly valid reason to join. And then, as we grow, often we get people talking to each other because they've got an issue at work and they want to have that voice in the workplace. And once you start talking to your colleagues about the possibility of that, that's another reason to join, and a very proactive reason to join. One thing I do want to say, though, is the union isn't me. The union is you, Theresa, it's you, Ruth. We are all the union, and people don't always recognise that. So, we are democratic organisations. Anybody who joins the union has the opportunity to have a say. And if you want to make a difference to your working life, then joining a union is a good way of being able to do that.
That's a really good reminder, actually. I have been a trade union rep in the past and done pay negotiations and personal support, but I haven't for a very long time. So perhaps now that my children are getting to the stage where they're leaving home, perhaps I ought to play a more active role again. And all of the union reps that I know of here are men, so perhaps we do need a wider, middle-aged white men as well. So perhaps we do need a wider representation here. So really, really useful things for me to think about personally. I'm going to open up quickly to see if there's anyone on the call who has a question before I dive in. I could talk all night, so I don't feel like you have to, but if you do have a question, we'd love to hear it.
You've got a question in the chat from Steve Lorimer. Stephen, I don't know if Stephen wants to say it out loud or if you'd like you to read it.
No, I can pitch in out loud. I never want to shut my mouth if I get an opportunity to open it. Sorry, I wasn't sure if it was the right point in the chat, so which is why I dropped it into the chat. What I wanted to ask about was I was listening to an interesting podcast at the weekend that featured Gina Miller. She was promoting her book No Offence But, which talks about how to change individuals' unacceptable behaviour, and she was focusing very much on achieving sustainable change through a process of questioning the individual as to why they believe that their behaviour was okay, rather than policing it or perhaps explaining it. And I could see why that would be sustainable, but it also sounded like it would take a flipping long time to achieve sort of change at scale. So I just wondered if you had any thoughts on how we achieve sustainable change in behaviour in the workplace without also leaving women and other people open to that unacceptable behaviour for a period of time that is itself unacceptable.
What a good question. So I know that the members that I work with, a lot of them are genuinely not sure what is acceptable language these days and what is not acceptable language. So we can help with that. And quite a lot of people are receptive to it, and we run webinars, we provide guidance for members and so on. And culture change is quite slow. I think where it works best is where the union is working in partnership with the employer. Employers, some employers are fantastic, other employers talk the talk but don't walk the walk, and some of them think that just by announcing something at a leadership level it's going to make a difference. And what I would say in those organisations is you've got leaders at every level of the organisation, and quite a lot of those are trade union members or trade union representatives. So I think that power of persuasion and trying to change the culture in that way has to be a collective effort if it's going to have success and sustain success. But there is a minority of people who willfully behave in an unacceptable manner, and they have to be dealt with. So that's not at my discretion. As a union, we have a code of code of behavioural conduct, and we have the ability in rules to deal with unacceptable behaviour, which can take many different forms, and we do. If we need to do that, we do, because part of our responsibility is to ensure that, as far as we can, our members are safe, physically and mentally safe in their workplace. Now, I would say that's an exceptional thing. It's not the majority, but it can be really frustrating that culture change takes so long. But what can we do? We have to get into a position. Sometimes people use the analogy with health and safety. And if you go around a dockyard, for example, or an industrial installation, members will have no qualms at all about calling out other people where they see there's a health and safety risk or a health and safety breach. Now, that wasn't always the case. That has happened over time. Where we want to be, I think, is in a similar position in relation to behaviour, creating an environment in which people, women in particular, have the confidence to say if they find behaviour unacceptable, and particularly that they have colleagues who will support them in saying that. These are really, really difficult issues. And it's part of the trade union life, because it never ends. You know, it's something that we do all the time. And we do make a difference in some areas, but it is slow and we can't always do it on our own. But we do know what our expectations are, and we do work with members and representatives to try and ensure that they meet those expectations.
Thank you, Stephen. Excellent question. If we have any other questions, please do come in whenever you'd like to. I'm going to make one recommendation on the back of what you said there, Sue, because it reminded me of my favourite book, which is Feminist Fight Club, which I could see Aileen was on the call earlier on. Anyone who works with me will know that I recommend this over and over again, because it's on that theme of collective action and supporting others in the workplace by calling out things which aren't appropriate and supporting people in difficult situations. And there's lots of kind of micro behaviours we can do which can work. Stephen, the fact that you're here and that you're willing to ask those kind of questions, and presumably you're asking those within your workplace, is a really strong signal as well that this is not just a women's issue, this is an everyone issue, this is a how to create decent places to work issue. So thank you for that.
Absolutely, it is. And what I would say is it's really important to call it out at the micro level, because you don't get the big issues, the real big problems, in an environment that deals with the micro issues. It's only where those micro issues are allowed to thrive and grow that you get the really big problems. So we can all play a part in that.
Thank you so much, Sue. Catherine, you have your hand up.
Yeah, brilliant. Thank you, Sue. Something you mentioned earlier was that about taking the role at the TUC, you said someone talked you into it. That's something that we find quite a lot with women, that they're potentially put off by jobs. They either think that they can't do the work, so they've got this sort of imposter syndrome, or that it's not going to be, they're not going to be able to take on the workload, or the flexibility won't suit them. I was just wondering if you could think back to then and expand on, you know, your rationale, but also the support you got from that person to actually persuade you to go for the job.
So yeah, I mean, imposter syndrome is, I think, really widespread, and particularly amongst women. Look, I come from a really good family, a caring family, but a family with very limited experience of the kinds of environments that I've worked in. So I didn't really know what I was doing, if I'm being honest. I was taking a punt. And I guess, you know, that's not unusual. Lots of people take a punt. I guess if you've done a particular qualification, you've got a better direction of where you're going. And I suppose I kind of almost gave in, because I thought, well, he's probably wrong, but I'll just do it anyway. And then what have I got to lose? So I did. And then when somebody calls you to an interview and says, yeah, that sends a message to you that maybe you've got something there. And what I will say to you is that when I went to work for the TUC, I didn't get the job first time. I had 2 interviews, I didn't get the job. And I was told I was the runner-up. And then another one came up and at the TUC, and somebody contacted me and said, you didn't get that job, do you want to apply for this job? And I thought, well, not really, no, but I did like the experience of the interview, what I'd learned about the organisation. So I thought, oh, I'll show willing then. So I applied for that. And actually then what happened was a job in the department where I'd originally applied for did come up. And I guess, you know, this is something I've learned through my life. Have a go. Because if you don't have a go, nobody knows. If you do have a go, at least they knew I really wanted to work for them. And maybe I wasn't that far off first time. So I did get the job eventually. But when I went in to work in what was the economic department, it was a department full of very brainy men. So, you know, I started again with that imposter syndrome. But actually, there was an older man in that department who kind of took me under his wing. I was the only woman, so it had to be a man. Who took me under his wing and said, you can do this, do that, do that. And isn't that the journey that a lot of us go through, where gradually you build your confidence? I remember the first time I spoke at one of our conferences, I was literally shaking from head to foot. But I did it. And then I did it again, and it gets a bit easier. Not saying you don't get nervous, you don't get that adrenaline rush, but it's growth through pushing yourself, isn't it? And, you know, I might not have had a family who knew about my work environment, but we've got that doggedness in us, I guess. And sometimes that's all you need.
There's a lot there that resonates with me as well. Great question, Catherine. Thank you, Sue. I've got 9 minutes and far too many questions. But I do need to ask you about this year's strike action, because it's been a particularly there's been a lot more action needed recently than we've had for a number of years. I wondered if you'd mind saying something about where we are at the moment and where you see us going.
Sure. So I think what's really brought this year's strike action to a head has been obviously the cost of living crisis and the rate of inflation. So civil servants like you, Theresa, you will know you've had really low pay increases for a number of years. But when inflation is also really low, you can maybe put up with that. But I think that cumulative impact has moved a lot of people to the position where they're not prepared to put up with it anymore. And that's what enables the union to take forward a dispute. Let's be clear, unions don't create disputes. It's a membership decision. We advise, we try and negotiate, and at the end of the day, it's then a member's decision whether or not they want to take industrial action. So for the first time since 2011, when there was a big public sector pensions dispute, we had most of our members across the civil service coming out for 2 days of industrial action. So 4.4% or 4.5% doesn't match inflation. What did we get out of that? We got out of it a 1,500 payment and a commitment to further dialogue and further negotiation going forward. I think the teachers, the NEU would say the same thing, actually. Their industrial action was hugely successful. And I can say that by walking between meetings on days in London when there was an NEU strike, they were thronging the streets. And it's very, very difficult to ignore that visible presence. Now, I know there was a debate within that union about whether their offer was good enough. But there was that pragmatic decision, which the members backed, that 6% is good enough to take now. It doesn't mean that that's the end of the story, but let's take it. So there've been a lot of successes. I think what we've seen over this summer actually is more women taking industrial action, particularly if you think about the health service as well as education. And alongside that, a level of public support that has not diminished in the way it might have done previously. So I think it's been successful. I think every union has to have the ability to do that. It's something that we do actually not very often at all. And the government are going to make that even more difficult for members to take industrial action in the future. But at the end of the day, sometimes it's the last resort, and by being in a union and participating in a lawful piece of industrial action, you did at least have that protection. So I think that's been the experience in the public sector, where actually the key issue has been the one of funding, and the fact that essentially a lot of employers may have had a different view, but they're controlled by the Treasury and the Cabinet Office pay remit. In the private sector, it's been a bit different. We've had more ballots in the past 12 months than we've had for a long time. But virtually all of those, not all of them, virtually all of those have been resolved because those employers have the ability to negotiate free of any other interference. Now, whether genuinely they can't afford to do that, then we know that because we look at the accounts, we look at the finances. But there are private sector employers who could have afforded to do more, and with union pressure, they did do more. So I think it all has a role to play. I think we may be in for another difficult pay round in the 12 months ahead. But it is a minority activity. Most of the time, what we do every day never hits the headlines. It's about us and it's about our representatives just helping people at work.
Thank you. I'm going to bring Christina in because she's put a really interesting point in the chat, which is definitely something that we talked about in our department, where striking is actually, it is very much a last resort, and where people are really committed to doing a job because they think it's the right thing to do for the public. It's incredibly hard to take that action. So Christina, would you like to come in at that point?
Yeah, I'm sorry my camera's not working. I don't know what the hell's going on there. Can you see me? I can't see me. No?
I can't see you, but we can hear you.
That's enough. Yeah, I actually found it really hard to strike this year. It was a very difficult decision to make because it comes at a time in term when I know it's just going to disturb the students so much. And the world of education's changing. We live in a constantly shifting landscape with the way that the students' behaviour are coming through. They're going about education in a different way. And we seem to be having to nurture them and cajole them through the whole process far more than we did previously. I mean, we're being lots more pastoral care. And you take a couple of strike days off, and before you know it, students aren't attending any lectures. They take it as an excuse to not attend lectures and things like that. It makes it an extremely hard decision whether to strike or not. I just took the odd day here and there, basically, to make my point that, yes, I do support this, but didn't feel that I could strike for all of the days that we had. And we did ask for an awful lot of them as well. We also had problems with there didn't seem to be much agreement between the Higher Education Committee within the union, within UCU, and what was going on at the head of UCU. There was all some very strange shenanigans went down. And the local marking and assessment boycott got penalised very badly, and I wanted to stand up with them, but they were also calling strikes left, right and centre. And it's like, look, I'm about collegiality. I want to make things work. Yeah, so it's I don't really want to do it that way. But I do feel that sometimes I'm maybe not putting in as much as I can, because they tend to call meetings at the last minute. And if you can't make it, you can't make it, can you? So you feel like you're not putting in as much as well. So it's almost been difficult to be a member of the union this last year, but I'm still there. I'm still paying my dues and I'm still part of it. I'm not leaving. It actually brings me to a point I wanted to ask you about, which I know what I believe, but I want to ask what you believe. Do you think a business, an organisation that engages with the union and encourages its members, it encourages its employees or members to be union members, is a healthier company?
So first of all, can I say I do sympathise with you. UCU have had an awful lot of days of strike action, and I know many people in lots of sectors have genuinely agonised over that. Just compare it with our dispute in the civil service. Question, could we have got more by taking more strike action? Possibly. But, you know, the judgment was we made some progress. Now, I'm not saying that UCU are right or wrong. It's not for me to second guess what another union does. But there are a number, more than once, I think, that have really lost a lot of money through strikes. And I know that commitment, your professional commitment and personal commitment to your role does matter. I absolutely accept that. Sorry, can you just repeat your actual question? I've gone on that. So.
No, thank you. It actually makes me feel a bit better, to be honest with you. It is a really hard decision to strike, yeah. No, my actual question was, like I said, I know what I believe, but do you think that organisations are actually healthier for actually engaging with unionisation, having unionisation within their organisation?
So yes, there is, I believe, academic research that shows that organisations which work in partnership with their trade unions have better records on health and safety, better records on employee engagement. And let's be clear, if you don't have a union, that doesn't mean people's concerns, worries, or problems go away. It just means they find other outlets for them. And if there's conflict, that will be demonstrated in other forms. I think what we do is channel that and look for a resolution for people. So absolutely, you don't have to take my word for it. There is research that shows better motivation, better health and safety, better engagement. Now, obviously, that's not the case if you're in an employer where you're in constant disagreement. But where union and employer relationships work well, that is absolutely the outcome.
Thank you.
Thank you so much. There's a really interesting comment from, I think, Jane in the chat. Would you like to come out and say that, or shall I read it out?
It's all right. I'll send words from over the channel. Because living in France, I'm often asked why the UK population and workers aren't out demonstrating over so many issues, when here in France, well, I mean, we'll strike about anything over here, but the biggest, I suppose the most recent example was the raising the statutory retirement age to 62. I mean, listen to the news and anybody is incapable of working past the age of 60 and a month. So it's been quite an issue. There'll be an election in the next 12 months in the UK. In the union movement, are you getting a sense that change is possible? Because as a potential overseas voter, I sort of look around and I'm depressed, quite frankly, by the situation in the UK. Is there a sense change is possible? Is it likely? And does that excite you?
So first of all, yeah, I look at what goes on in France and think, good on them, out on the streets again. I mean, the culture is different, obviously, and the legal framework is different. So it's not the same, but it's a very effective way, or a very visible way of demonstrating that. So do I believe that change is possible? Yes, I do. So as I said, I've come back from the Labour Party conference. I don't know whether you have seen their proposals for a new deal for working people. I think that will provide us with a very positive framework to work with. And I am excited by that. One of the things that has been really difficult for trade unions, particularly in areas where there is no unionisation, is just having the ability to talk to those workers. We don't have rights of access into the workplace. Sometimes employers say, well, we don't need you. And you say, well, let us talk to your workers and see if we do. And they don't. And we will get rights of access if we get a change of government. That's not to say I'm making a case for government to recruit for trade unions. I'm absolutely not. Just want to open the door so we can walk through it and make our own case, and people will make their own decisions. So I do believe that change is possible. Also, in the industrial arena, I do think it's possible as well. Big debate in Liverpool yesterday about climate and the environment and the role of what we need to do in the energy sector to get us back on track to meet our net zero goals. Do you know what? Meetings and discussions that might have had half a dozen people a few years ago, they're all packed. There's a real energy. There's a real belief that things can be different. And I don't only mean from trade unions, but from businesses as well. Some of them whom are equally fed up with lack of clarity about direction and lack of consistency about direction. So yeah, I'm really excited by it. I think, we've been in the trade union movement progressively under attack for a number of years. And this could provide us with the opportunity to do what we need to do. So yeah, it energises us. And actually, I think everybody wants a better future.
Brilliant. Well, really hope everything pans out.
Yeah, me too.
So, any last questions for Sue before I come in with my last one? Ruth, I think you had one. Yeah.
Sorry, rookie error. Sue, the chair, not the chair, the general secretary of the TUC has been not anymore, but was for quite a long time, Frances O'Grady, which I guess she was the first female general secretary. And I wondered if that had made any difference to the TUC agenda or union agendas, because there was also quite a lot of female leadership at the head of some of the biggest unions in recent years.
So that's absolutely right, Ruth, and that has happened really since Frances became General Secretary. I'm not saying there's a causal effect, but when I worked for the TUC all those years ago, it was largely white men sitting around the table. Many of them doing a very good job, but you know, we now have female General Secretaries of Unite, of Unison, had a female General Secretary of the National Education Union. Does it alter the TUC's agenda? Well, it makes women's voices, I think, confidence to go to places where we might not have gone before. Talked previously about menopause. That's just one example. But, you know, TUC is a democratic organisation too, so it does have to go where its unions want to go. So it's having women in positions of power in unions that can make a difference to that. I think there's still a lot more to be done on the gender pay gap, for example. We are talking now increasingly about the gender pension gap. And what I would say about Frances, I worked very closely while I was president. She's now in the House of Lords, and she's doing equal pay, equal pensions work in the House of Lords. So once a trade union is always a trade union.
Thank you so much, Sue. I've got one last question, and then we'll let you take part in the rest of the call if you can stay with us. So thank you to those of you. I think we have lost a few people at 5 o'clock who've had to go, but there are about 20 of us left. If you've got any last words of advice for the women and men who support women who are on this call?
All I would say is believe in what you're doing. Sometimes it can be slow, sometimes it can feel like you're not winning, but if enough of us believe, we can change things. I will stay, but my battery's running low, so I might have to just log out a minute, plug in and come back in.
Fantastic. Thank you so much. It's been an absolute pleasure from my perspective to meet you virtually and to hear more about your views and your story. So thank you to you and to the committee for inviting me and Sue to the land lecture this year. I shall hand back to Catherine.
Brilliant. Yeah, thanks so much, Sue. It was really interesting, really good insights there. I'm keen to hear more from others. So I know some people will have to go, but it'd be great if some of you could hang around. So we have got, bear with me a second while I share my screen. Okay. Let's try that again. There we go. So I think if we can have a bit of a discussion, but I wanted to just highlight a few of our future Warren events, people who do need to drop off. And I think Ruth posted the link to the feedback form in the chat. But Ruth, if you can repost it if it isn't there already. So just a quick shout out for in November, we're returning to our usual time of 1:30. And we are actually doing a joint event with the early career researchers. And this will be talking about career breaks. So there's various reasons why people take career breaks. So we're exploring that through a sort of panel. It'd be great if you could join us for that one. And then at Christmas, we're doing a Christmas social, which is going to be joint with Wisdom and Worms. So they're the other sort of international OR societies, so American and European. And we're planning an event where we do a little bit from each of the societies on what we've done in the last year, but throw in some fun quizzes and various things. We're also hoping that we'll be able to do what we did last year, which is a sort of a hybrid event. So get together in little groups, maybe if you work in an office together or a particular department, get together and chat through and join in on the quiz as a group. The program for 24 is in development, but we will probably stick to our third Thursday at 1:30, monthly, hopefully. And likely that most of the events that we hold next year will still be virtual online, because we know how that's accessible for a lot of you.